Welcome back. This is the final podcast of the series of podcasts that looks at the long-term significance of the Night of the Long Knives. Now, in the previous podcast, we focused in on what we call the Hitler myth, which was the title of Kershaw's book written in the late 1980s. And there are two sort of significant themes that come through. Make sure you read those. You read that particular chapter about the Night of the Long Knives. Führer without sin. Hitler and the Little Hitlers. Okay, so that extract I've copied for you, and it is in the folder in Frog. So two key strands. The first strand from Kershaw's book was picked up in the previous podcast, which was the sort of safety valve idea. And then the second strand is this notion of Hitler's charismatic authority, which we have mentioned in previous lessons. Okay, so there's the mind map, the area we're focusing in on here. Okay, so exactly what's this about? Let's just make this the first point very clear. Charismatic authority is basically saying you have got the right to step beyond normal rules to achieve your objectives. Okay, now you need to separate this into two parts. The first part is Hitler, his authority before 1933. Now, before 1933, before he became Chancellor on the 30th of January 1933, so before 1933, when we're talking about Hitler's authority, we're talking about his authority as leader of the Nazi Party. Okay, he had no authority beyond that. He was not leader of Germany yet. Okay, now within the Nazi Party itself, ever since 1921, Hitler had charismatic authority. Not at first. Remember, when he first joined the party in 1919, for the first year and a half, he did not have authority to break rules. He had to work within the rules of the party. There was the chairman of the party, Anton Drexler, and Karl Harrer, decreed that decisions had to be made by committee and be voted upon. So Hitler was not did not have charismatic authority within his own party. But then, in 1921, within his own party, Hitler became Führer of the party, and that concept of Führer basically defines it within that is that concept of charismatic authority. What that basically means is you can step beyond written rules to do what you want, and Hitler could do that within within his own party. That was part of the terms of him being Führer. He said, "I have a special gift, and that gift means that I basically can do whatever I want as long as it achieves objectives. You must obey me," and that's the basis of what we call the Führer principle. Okay, the Führer principle, that your right to be a leader comes from your personality. That's different from bureaucratic authority, which is the kind of authority that we tend to think by. Okay, bureaucratic authority means you have a job, you have an official position, and that official position defines what you can do, and you have to work within the rules of your job. Well, Hitler within the party was not a bureaucratic leader. He was a charismatic leader who could step beyond the rules. Okay, there were rules written down, but he could step beyond that. He was Führer. So within the Nazi Party, authority was charismatic authority. So it's important to understand that particular concept. Okay. Now then, on the 30th of January 1933, Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. Okay. Now, for the first year and a half, Hitler was a bureaucratic leader. Okay, his authority as Chancellor was restricted by the Constitution. Okay, so there were constraints on his authority. Okay, there were written definitions about what he could do. Now, certainly in the first 5 weeks, in February 1933, Serious restrictions. He couldn't pass laws without going to the Reichstag. He couldn't arrest people, etc. He was tied down by the Weimar Constitution. Now, obviously, in February and March 1933, his powers expanded. The Reichstag Fire Decree and then the Enabling Act expanded his powers, but it didn't change the nature of his authority. His authority, even after the Reichstag Fire Decree and the Enabling Act, was still official. Okay, the rules had been rewritten. It allowed him to do more, so he could pass laws without going to the Reichstag. He could arrest people at will, but nevertheless, they were still written restrictions on his power. Legally, although he was a dictator, he was still legally restrained. He could be dismissed by the president, for example. The Enabling Act only allowed him to pass laws by himself for 4 years. There were restrictions on his power. So therefore, he was not yet Führer. Then, after the Night of the Long Knives, and in particular after Hindenburg's death, Hitler became president. Okay. Now again, what that basically meant is Hitler's power expanded enormously. He had been a very, very powerful head of government, a dictator of the government. The Enabling Act gave him those powers. That's Chancellor. And now, as President, he is also head of state, which means he is the Commander-in-Chief of the army. Chancellor plus President made Hitler more powerful. But nevertheless, each of those officers, the position of Chancellor and the position of President, were defined by written rules. So even though his power has expanded even further, even so, his authority is still official. What he does is still legally restrained by the rules that are attached to those two officers. But the Night of the Long Knives was hugely significant, because what the Night of the Long Knives did, it added another level to his authority. The Rome Purge, as it's often called, meant that Hitler was now not just an official leader. Okay, remember, official means Chancellor plus President, because those are written officers. They're defined by written rules. He's more than just the Chancellor and President. Okay, he is the Führer, and the Führer is greater than the sum of those two parts, because the term Führer means he is a charismatic leader. Now, what charismatic leader? Completely unrestrained authority, the right to step beyond what the law says you can or cannot do, purely because your personality gives you the right to do this. Now again, revisit that key point. Hitler had always had that authority as a leader of the party, but now, as a result of the Night of the Long Knives, that charismatic authority has been transplanted from the party to his position as Chancellor and President. Okay, and the Night of the Long Knives has given him that right. Okay, so Hitler had charismatic authority before, but only as Führer of the party. Now the Night of the Long Knives has changed this. Why? Here's the key point. Because on the Night of the Long Knives, Hitler stepped beyond the law and committed murder, and no one stopped him. Okay, and it's the no one stopped him bit. The German people allowed him to basically commit an illegal act, not because they were afraid to speak out, but because the German people believed that what he did on that night was in the best interests of the nation. So effectively, the German people said it is important that Hitler be allowed to break the law to bring the party under control, because that will bring about law and order. That was the theme that we developed in the previous podcast. And so Hitler obviously seized upon that to say there are occasions when I will have to step beyond the law, because I embody what the nation believes is good for the nation. I embody the will of the nation. Okay, I am a physical embodiment of what the 40 million German people believe. I speak the thoughts of the German people. I am almost supernaturally in touch with the will of the people, and that puts me above written law, because written law is the realm of common ordinary people. I am better than that. I have almost got superhuman qualities that put me into a sort of divine link with what the people want to happen, and that's the basis of charismatic authority. So from this point onwards, Hitler would repeatedly claim that he had the legal authority to step beyond the confines of the officers of what he could and couldn't do. He would use that. He would frequently make reference to the fact he was the voice of the German people. Now, in that sense, what we call the plebiscites are ever so important. People often think, oh, well, the German people, there was no more voting after Hitler took power, after the 5th of March elections. Well, there were no voting for Reichstag elections, there was no voting for political parties, because there's only one political party. But Hitler frequently took his actions to the people and said, will you vote yes to what I'm doing? There's a picture there, you can see the banner, Ja to the Führer, vote yes. And he did this on these occasions. And on each occasion, the vote was obviously fixed. You know, it was a significantly high vote, people saying yes. But the reason he did this is to publicise that he was the voice of the German people. So know those plebiscites, okay? They're like, nowadays we call them referendums. Simply, you take an issue to the people. Germany has withdrawn from the League of Nations. Do you agree with that? Yes or no? It's a yes or no question to every single one. In August 1934, people were asked, do you agree that Hitler should be President and Führer? In January 1935, do you agree that the Tsar should be reincorporated into Germany? In March 1936, there was a plebiscite about the occupation of the Rhineland. And the last one, in March 1938, there was a plebiscite, do you agree with the invasion of Austria, the Anschluss with Austria? So the key point about plebiscites is they were provided the means to promote the notion of charismatic authority of the Hitler myth, that Hitler has got the right, that Hitler is the embodiment, the voice of the German people, and that came out of the Night of the Long Knives. Thank you.